the key is you need to be able to have somebody to manage your team, maybe even people who've been with you for a while and they've been reporting directly to you. You need to be able to have somebody manage customer relationships, even customers who've worked with you for years.
Yeah.
And until you get over that, every problem will continue to come to you and you'll be stuck. All right, Todd here, and I am here today with David Bloom. He's an investor at Signia Venture Partners, and we're going to talk about how a venture capital firm and how that part of the world looks at the construction industry, some of the opportunities there, and get into a lot of interesting stuff. So, David, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks for having me. I've been a longtime fan.
Yeah, cool. So let's jump into it. You offer an interesting perspective. You have a very different perspective on the construction industry than probably most of the people listening to this podcast who are construction business owners or leaders. So how does a guy like you at a venture capital firm look at the construction industry? What's your perspective on the industry as a whole?
Yeah, great question. I'm lucky enough to come from a construction family. Dad has been a builder from multifamily, huge mixed-use projects out in the Bay Area to low-income housing. So kind of grew up around the job site. So my perspective started kind of traditionally. But how we think about it is, look, I think venture and technology has been a great proponent of progress for a lot of different things. It's missed the built world in a lot of ways. So when we look at construction and spend time, we want to see where can we create efficiencies with technology. A lot of the times there's one or two people in a big construction firm or on a team that are interested, but that's always not enough to really make the needle move from the inside, right? So what we believe is outsiders and people building solutions to sell into really have big opportunities to really change how we live and how we build. And the reason, I guess, to take a step back of why we got interested in it is the pure size, right? We've in the decay we've seen around us, right? I think people they solve problems they see, right? They solve problems that they experience firsthand. We live in a big city. I live in San Francisco. We see the delays. We see the unbelievable price a lot of time for new buildings, whether it's housing or large construction. So I think it's, at least for me, very personal and something that we see every day. So when we see something that we believe we can kind of bring our expertise into, that's how we got excited. And then, as you know, once you dig in, you're kind of stuck and really into the weeds with this stuff. And I've been investing in construction for about 4 years now and have no interest in stopping.
So let's talk about this. What is a venture capital firm and what exactly do you do?
Yeah. So at a high level, we are capital allocators, right? We raise money just like companies do from institutions and larger folks than us, usually endowments, institutions, fund of funds, corporations, individuals, to then go out and find startups, right? Invest in the best and brightest entrepreneurs in the world. Every fund has a different strategy. Some folks focus on industries, different stages, different geos, right? What we do, we look at the early stages. So pre-seed and seed, your first check, your second check, you're in a couple people in a garage, you're 10 people and have been in business for a year. That's kind of our strategy. That's where we focus. And so we invest in software and hardware. So I think that's an important distinction while we can do construction, right? I think a lot of folks do software only. We do both. And we try to lead and be your biggest partner. So a good distinction in ventures, there's lead and there's follow-on investors. Follow investors are your friendly, here's a 50K, 100K check. We support you, but at the end of the day, you're kind of on your own. What we want to do and what we've been doing for about 10 years, we write big checks, right? We write million to 4 million, take up most of the round, own 10 to 20% of a company, and we're take a board seat a lot of the time, right? We're hands-on, we're active partners. And then just on our strategy and what we do, so we invest in everything. There's a couple categories like healthcare or climate that we're not exactly. Climate's maybe nuclear, right? Things that you need a PhD in. We don't have the expertise on the team, but outside of that, right, we invest in a ton of different industries and built world broadly: construction, real estate, manufacturing, robotics. has been a big focus of mine personally. And so starting construction, I've done a lot of construction. That's where I want to spend most of the time today. But really it's expanded to, there's a lot of opportunities in everything that touches physical industries and physical problems.
Yeah. So why, when you have the opportunity to invest your time and capital into a lot of different industries, why construction? Why does that stand out as an opportunity?
So, I mean, on a very base level, right? The market is giant. As an early stage investor, right? You want to back awesome people, awesome entrepreneurs in giant markets, right? Just to be able to create $1 billion company, it's hard enough. But if the market's not big enough, or the market's $1 billion, right? It's physically impossible, right? So one, construction. I think that's the lazy kind of why a lot of people think they want to do construction. Personally, I mean, I think it's one of the most important things to invest in, infrastructure and housing, right? I think construction's, they're both very different. Both we'll talk about it. And I've talked about it a lot in the past. Like housing is one of the biggest issues we have in this country. So just from a societal impact, right? That's why I want to spend time in housing. Construction, I mean, just look at the data, right? The data is pretty it's pretty apparent, just lack of efficiency gains, right? And really just skyrocketing costs. I mean, it's funny to see the like how much it costs to do the Golden Gate Bridge or build that versus a bridge now, right? Like it's kind of staggering. So I think just coming from where we sit and see efficiency gains daily and automation and things that bring down price of goods or software or who knows what every day. And you see that in construction, especially when I have a little bit of a background in it, it's kind of a no-brainer for me. So I think just the outsized impact it can make on a giant market, on people's everyday lives, I think is the last thing. A lot of great software companies are built that no one outside of San Francisco ever knows about, right? It's a marketing software for other tech startups. It's a great company. It's very needed, but they sell to each other, right? The average American family in Sacramento or middle of Ohio, right, will never know about that company. So how can we invest in companies that really affect everybody's lives, right? Or positively affects everyone's lives?
Yeah. So let's talk about the housing shortage, or what some would call the housing crisis. What, in your opinion, what are some of the symptoms of the current housing shortage? What tells you that there is a housing crisis right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things. One is just pure price, right? It's a market by market, but the sheer increase in prices in coastal cities, for example, has been incredible in the bad way. So that's one. The second one is just the data around the ability to own, right? I think that is really telling. When people think of housing crisis, they think, oh, everyone's on the street. That's not exactly true, right? There's a lot of different reasons for that issue. A lot of it's the ability to own, right? Or you're getting priced out, right? Home ownership is probably one of the, if not the best way to create generational wealth. That is when people are priced out forever, or it doesn't make sense, so they can't afford a starter home. That's the biggest symptom, right? And that used to be kind of just coastal cities. Now, if you look across the nation, that's at most places, right? Cost of living is just too high. So I think that is one of the biggest things for me in terms of the house, like the symptom, right? But another thing that we see that can kind of lead to it, right, is just watching a home get built, right? Think about the average family. Now I want to build a new home or rent a home. Or even rent the current home, right? They go move out into an apartment. That 6 months turns into a year and a half really quickly, right? And that's, some people can afford that. Not many people can, right? And so I think not just the sheer ability to own, but the sheer ability to even have the chance to build or rent out, right? I think is a housing crisis in itself.
And what are some of the ripple effects on the economy, on our country, from the housing crisis? Are there ripple effects? And if so, what are the ripple effects that you're seeing?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's plenty of downstream effects. One, I mean, what we talked about briefly is, ability to own. So generational wealth is staggering. I mean, people paying, I don't know, a quarter of their paycheck, or I don't know the exact number, depends on the market, on rent, that you're not building equity. That's just horrible for the average American wealth creation, right? And that has downstream effects on being able to get loans and building a family, right? I think another kind of, I don't know exactly how much it correlates, but yeah, building a family is a lot harder renting an apartment than building out a home, right? So I think that's one. Two, I don't know if it's a bad thing at all, but it's a very different where people live and work, right? I think remote work helped this, but prior people would have to move out of cities and be out of jobs, right? Or be commuting very long hours, right? Now I think it goes back and forth. I think the tide shifts a little bit in person, depending on where you're working these days. But if you can't afford something in the city, right, or can't afford something in the greater metropolitan area because there's a lack of housing or you can't build anything, that makes the average worker a lot harder. You get priced out in cities, right? So I think those are all big issues. And then finally, I think the last one we've seen where a lot of this tech could help, but new communities, right? I won't say new cities, but building up new communities. I think there's a lot of great towns that could be great cities, right? Whether it's a stimulus from a giant company bringing a factory there, right? You need to be able to build housing to support your workers, not even a factory, right? Think of a Google, Facebook, Apple. They come and put a headquarters in, and you name the city, that's hundreds of thousands of workers, right? You still need to be able to go house them. And if you don't, then there's a big issue, prices raise, competition, blah, 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 right? So there's a lot of missed opportunity, I think, to get out of the big cities, economic equality, just general growth in the rest of America, right? But you need housing, period, right? And not even just housing, right? You need buildings. You need to be able to build retail and office and all the above. And that takes 10 years, kind of gets forgotten.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that our ability to produce housing and buildings is a constraint on our economic growth.
Yeah, I think so. I think absolutely. I think housing is fundamental. If you think about, just even kind of a simple example, right? If you're spending 20% of your income on rent for 20 years instead of building equity, right? You're not going to go, your economic output is not going to be nearly as high, just on a base level, your consumer spending, right? But you're not going to, chances are you're probably not going to have as many kids, which then lowers the ability to, it's a little dry, but future workforce, right? Or go get educated, right? It has long-term effects that I think are overlooked a lot of the time in politics and different rules and regulations around housing, which is another issue. But
yeah. And then from a corporate level, if I know of a large company that's planning to build a large data center or a headquarters, somewhat rural area in Ohio, and the housing market is saturated now, and they need to house 1,500 people. So where are these folks going to live? They can't build the office. They can't hire people. There's no place for them to live. So it becomes a lid on expansion, and they're limited to other places. So yeah, interesting. I agree. I think a lot of people overlook the impact that the housing shortage has on families, people, generational wealth, corporate growth, the GDP, lots of things. Yeah.
Well, I think you hit on a great point. It's right now it can be a bad thing, right? It could be hindering growth, but that example right there that realistically should be something that's driving growth in cities that have fallen apart since we've lost our manufacturing base, right? In the middle of America, for example, not just there, but in general. If you can go build housing quickly, why would you not go build a giant factory or office an hour outside of a big city, 2 hours outside of a big city? It's cheaper. It's revitalizing areas, right? And I think that's a huge opportunity for someone. Obviously, there's political and policy issues, right, with all that, and how people decide where to build. But if you can spin up housing, right, that just takes away one of the big questions, and that can hopefully revitalize a lot of cities, towns, areas that have fallen down economically speaking.
Yeah. So how does a venture capital firm like yours view the housing shortage or the housing crisis? What's your perspective? Is it, oh no, the sky is falling, we need to get out of construction? Or is it, okay, there are big opportunities here for us to solve big problems? Is it something else?
Yeah, so I think it's One, I think it's a huge problem. We at Signia, I mean, early stage, right? We do a lot of different deals a year, small relative to others, but still 15, 20 bets a year. We want to back really big macro trends, right? Housing shortage is not going away. It doesn't really, I think a lot of people get hyper fixated on the market, where prices are. Obviously it heats and cools. There's great studies showing that the big builders should be building at all times, right? If they wanted to even make a dent in the future, they need to be building even through the bad times. So we're not scared of that. I think it also just kind of flips the buyer, right? The right now it's probably more build to rent. It's not perfect. It will hopefully flip back, right? That's not what we want. We want individuals buying, but if we can get more housing stock, that's a positive. So we're not running away. Where we try to focus, a lot of it is on the actual construction piece, and then on the transaction piece. So we've done some stuff in the past and ability to buy home, talk about this generational wealth, like rent to own is a great model that we've backed, right? Or how do we finance differently with different assets now that people's wealth is a little bit different, right? It's not just a paycheck that you're very stable and clear, right? So where most of our investments have been in the actually building side. So our idea is that if we can be faster and cheaper, that will incentivize the big builders to work with us. As much as this, we talk about all the good this can cause, especially public builders. They're public companies. They have the bottom line to really focus on. So if it's faster and cheaper, that's the only way they'll ever do it. And then they can spin it however they want, right? But really need to focus. And the reason we're excited now is the tech and the ability to that has really hit that point, and we've proven it. And homes are being built versus, hey, cool project that was modular, cool project that was 3D printed, but it cost $2 million and it was a experimental, cool, fun thing, right? I think we've seen a switch in the last few years, both on the tech side and the interest from these big builders, big GCs, understanding like this is our time, right? If we don't do it now, we're going to be left in the dust because it's getting to the point it's cheaper, right? And so as much as we want to do things for good, right, a lot of the time, we believe that you have to just be better and quicker to get people's interest, and then you can go down that route.
So what are some of the portfolio companies that you're involved with that the big public builders and general contractors have an appetite for? And then what are some of the problems they're solving?
Yeah. So we have three main investments in this space, all working with different giant GCs or home builders. So have kind of, actually not even just giant, regional, all the way up to kind of the largest in the US. So we've done three different investments. One on panelized homes, right? So built with robots in factories, panelized, right? Started with just pure wood lumber panels. Now at the point where it's fully enclosed MEP, right? Ship them in a container on site, flip them up, right? We're saving tons of time. We can do floors, sometimes do roofs, but not yet. So that is really just a fundamental, like, how do we get like very simple homes done, right? It's from ADUs all the way up to 2 to 3 stories, but it's not a crazy different type of building. It all looks the same, right? It's an American dream. It's customizable. When you look at it, you say that's just a home, right? You have no idea. So that's a very big, and they've done the company's name is Agoras. They've done close to 200 homes now in the ground, mostly in Southern California. So really great. And they work with a lot of builders because lack of labor, right? Lack of ability to get people on site. And if you can not just make it easier, right? It's obviously easier. It's all pre-cut and pre-wired, but you need less people, right? And so you don't need to worry about the whole crew showing up. You can have a couple people that will be there, and you can do that part, right? So that's one. Another one on the multifamily side, Assembly OSM out in New York. So a little bit earlier of a company, but modular builder, spun out of Shop Architects, which has actually done a bunch of modular building in New York in the past. They're taking a little bit different approach. Modular is not new. Everyone knows that. But what they have figured out, what they're focusing on, is supply chain. If they can use technology and better buying and better design to streamline the process, so we're not guessing, we know exactly what we need, less waste, better design, and better ability if you know exactly what's coming and we know how to do it, the assembly is a lot quicker and cheaper, right? And they focus on basically using interchangeable supply around the country, right? So they're not focused on, hey, that's our lumber guy, that's our sink guy, right? That's our whatever. They really want to be able to have interchangeable. So the delays that we see in construction aren't as apparent. So they're out in New York and focus on kind of large scale multifamily. And then the last one is much more on the futuristic side, but also feeds into our thesis of making sure housing looks like housing is today, right? It's not this futuristic project that is a cool spectacle to look at, but it actually fixes Diamond Age out in Phoenix, or out in Arizona, rather. They're a 3D printing company. They 3D print concrete homes. They are currently working with a builder out there. They're selling their homes next door to traditionally built homes that look identical. So what we really believe is the technology is amazing. It's getting there on price. It's very, very fast. It's a lot more efficient and cleaner, but it can't look different and weird. And it needs to be, to really solve the problem, it needs to be same price and be able, no one should know, right? No one should know it's a 3D printed home. So those are the three, all solving different kind of parts of the housing supply, right? Diamond Age much more on the new build community track home, right? All the way to Agoras, which is doing the ADUs all the way to custom homes in like San Diego, so the most expensive real estate there is, right? All the way to modular multifamily out in the East Coast. So really, we were pretty focused on getting an array of options, right? I don't think if they all succeed, they're all billion-dollar companies, we still have a housing problem, right? It's so big, right, that we really want to tackle a lot of different areas, and still looking for more options as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you this: when you're considering making an investment in a company, obviously there's the total addressable market, there's the technology, there's a lot about the the technology, equipment, that sort of thing. But what about the team and the leader specifically? We have a lot of business owners and leaders. What are you looking for? I'll ask two questions. What are the red flags that you look for in a leader that tell you this is not a good investment? Does anything come to mind there?
Yeah, there's two things I kind of think of. So one specific to construction industry. It has been a popular topic because of the McKinsey report, and everyone knows how big it is. A lot of people, a red flag is having no construction background, right? Everyone here on your podcast knows how every little detail and every little process is very, very important. Coming in as a software engineer from name the big company and saying, hey, we could throw software at it, but not understanding why the process is currently done that way, that's red flag number one, because throwing software at construction does not just work, right? And I think that goes into our thesis that we can chat later. In terms of just broadly founders and entrepreneurs and business owners, the ability to see both sides, right? I think we've seen a lot of folks have great ideas, and then maybe it's great tech, maybe it's a great business plan, whatever. But then you have challenge or ask questions, or, well, it's great, but how are you going to get it in customers' hands? A lot of people don't want to talk about it, right? Their idea is so great. The technology is amazing. They're smarter than everybody. They don't want to talk about that, right? Or they kind of brush it off or be offended. I think that's kind of a big red flag that we've seen a lot, because founders love, I mean, it's like having a kid, right? You love your kid, it's great, but it's very, very hard to create a successful business, even on a small scale, right? So having folks and being able to listen, adapt, all the above, I think is super important, and especially for us, right? We invest sometimes with two people. They haven't built anything. It's an idea. It's not going to be the same idea 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road, right? So your ability to adapt, learn, accept. You have to be strong-willed to know what you want to build, but you also have to know when it's time to cut the cord and move on, right? Or change. So I think those are the two main flags that we really watch out for.
Let's talk about, there seems to be an interesting transition for an entrepreneur. In the early stages, they're wearing all the hats, And at some point, they need to take off the hats and just wear the CEO hat. And there's this messy middle transition from entrepreneur in startup mode to CEO of an ongoing concern. What are some keys to successfully making that jump from startup to okay, now there's a CEO of an ongoing business?
Trust and delegation, right? I think the hardest thing for a lot of founders to do is to give up their control, right? When you're a founder, you're 1-2 people. You are doing everything from product to fundraising to marketing to you name it. That's out of necessity, but it then is out of necessity to you not to be doing that, right? Down the road, you need to be focused on the big vision. You're the face of the company. You're fundraising kind of constantly, right? Even if you're not, and building out the team, right? The team is the biggest thing. So how do you sell people on your vision and recruit? Especially in the last couple of years, it's been very hard to recruit anybody with giant salaries, right? So getting people to join a startup is crazy. And so that is the biggest thing you should do. So I think spending a lot of time understanding what you need, what you're really good at. If you're going to need to find that, keep that forever, right? Do what you're the best at. But everything else, go find, there's better people, right? Go hire correctly, hire fast, and fire fast, right? If it's not a fit, don't work. Like you have to move on as hard as it is. So finding the right people and then being able to take a step back and say, I trust them, right? They can go do the construction part. They can go do the marketing part. Well, we're obviously involved, but that's not my day-to-day anymore. And I think that transition is really hard to, especially on companies that grow, that take a little bit longer to grow, right? And older industries that just have it just by default. So, I mean, you're in the weeds for 2-3 years, not just a year, right? And you really, it is your child, right? It's your legacy a lot of the time. So I think those are really things that people struggle with and need to do to really be successful and make a big business.
Yeah, it's the ability to insert somebody between you and your customer, to insert someone between you and your team, maybe for construction business owners. And if the key is you need to be able to have somebody to manage your team, maybe even people who've been with you for a while and they've been reporting directly to you. You need to be able to have somebody manage customer relationships, even customers who've worked with you for years. Yeah. And until you get over that, every problem will continue to come to you and you'll be stuck. I think a lot of people delude themselves into saying, it's a labor issue. Nobody understands my business. Nobody cares as much as I do as the founder or the owner. You can't find good people. Young people don't want to work, yada, yada, yada. But I can tell you, I've dug into it. And what it comes down to is the problem is between the ears of the founder. And it's fear. It's ego. It's fear. It's psychology.
I think luckily in construction, it's not all in one spot, right? It's not a tech company where everyone's in one building. You are on site, you're off site. I mean, if you're doing off site construction, you have a factory and you have a project, right? Where it is, and you have your tech team. So you physically can't be everywhere at once, which almost forces a lot of people quicker than it's very hard, or it's very easy to, if you're a smaller shop or you're all in one place or you do one project at a time, to really micromanage, right? And so ideally, if you're doing it correctly, and you almost forces you, which is a good forcing function. I think you hit on something interesting. Yeah, young people don't want to work. Well, a lot of what we do outside of housing is labor, right? We think about robotics, we think about what robots can't do and how we solve it, right? I think a big unlock eventually will be finding ways that not anyone, but most people can learn a trade, learn the job site, learn whatever quickly through software, right? That allows the barrier of that hurdle to work to become a lot lower, right? The barrier to work for Uber is downloading an app, or streaming on Twitch is getting a camera, right? That's why people want to do it. It's easy, comfortable. If you could make, working at a prefab factory or working on site for a week even, right? And being able to learn that in 30 minutes, not months, that's real money. I mean, probably better money, right? Trades are great opportunities for growth. And so I think, labor is something we think about a lot too, because a lot of people blame it on labor and say, It's labor, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That brings up, reminds me of part of a conversation I had with Garrett Moore from
Yeah.
Agoras, who was on the podcast back in episode 250. And he was a Navy SEAL. So I asked him, if, all right, let's say you were dropped into a third world country and you needed to build some number of houses, how would you do it? What would be different about the way Navy SEALs build houses than what the way we do in America? And one of the things he said was, well, first of all, I would figure out how to train plumbers and electricians faster than 4 years. Like the whole 4-year apprenticeship model, that's not going to work in the Navy SEALs. So I'm going to create specialists and we're going to get them up to speed in days or weeks rather than years. And that makes a lot of sense. It's like there was another skilled labor shortage that's still going on, and it's in the healthcare field. It takes a long time to make a neurologist or to make a cardiologist, like 15 years to make one. So they're figuring out ways to speed that process up and have other people do things. So look, it doesn't take 4 years to teach somebody how to glue PVC pipe together. I guarantee you can figure out ways to train them faster, but it's going to require some out of the box thinking. So yeah, that's a really good point. Let's shift gears and let's talk about Katerra.
Yep.
They raised over $2 billion in venture funding, and they ended up as one of the largest and most public failures in recent history. What lessons did a guy like you take away from that failure?
That's a great, the first thing everyone brings up when we're selling or pitching our companies to them, right, is Katerra. You're not familiar with the space. That's what they go to. So Garrett, luckily in the team there, and I have spent, especially them, have spent so much time studying it and talking to folks there. Because there's a lot of good, honestly. I mean, it's probably one of the reasons anyone cares and even knows about this space in the tech community, right? So outside of the big governance and like personnel issues of jets and things like that is just a people problem, right? What we learn and have taken with me is meeting, and I think Garrett says this as well, we spend too much time together, but meeting the customer at their current need, right? Katerra, great big vision. They want to do everything at once, and they didn't really care what the customer was asking for. They said, we're going to automate everything. That's the second point. They wanted to automate everything. That's really, really hard to do in any category. Throwing together a bunch of different people and processes and machines and coordinating them, that is extremely hard, especially at that scale, right? It's one thing to build one house and automate all of it. It's another thing to build, I mean, I don't even know what the volume was, but hundreds of millions, if not more, of promises they made, right? So I think what we learn and kind of how we've informed our vision of just construction broadly, you can't, as much fun and exciting and sexy it is to go, hey, let's go automate everything, that will almost never work because it's going to break. And so in any I mean, to renovation, to home building, to, I don't know, on the construction site, right? What we see a lot of startups do, try to either automate everything all at once. No one's going to pay for that, right? That's it's throwing software at the problem. Or two, doing one small little thing and then trying to expand out. That's great, but there are so many solutions to everything these days. Everyone has their own way. It's really hard to get an entire crew, an entire enterprise, entire whatever, to use one solution. And they probably don't need to, right? There's plenty of other options. Or even this is what people get wrong. Like, just because it's on a Google sheet or an Excel doesn't mean it's broken. It's probably the best way or almost the best way. And the solution is like a tiny bit better. No one will pay for a tiny bit better, right? So what certain home builders like Agoras or other investments you've looked at, they start manual. That first couple of projects look a lot like a traditional builder or a traditional renovation crew, right? They own the entire process. But if they own the entire process, they know exactly what they can automate or where efficiencies can be gained internally, right? So first you do it internally because you have that control, right? You control all the procurement for your contract subs, right? You can then give them a templatized, like, I don't know, list of steps, right? Or what you will actually need by day, or a better schedule or better estimate, right? you need to control the whole process. So is that slower and not as sexy, and venture investors like, oh, it's a service business? Yes, right at the beginning, but you build tech out from it within. And so the best, or the most simple case is you're just a better option internally, right? You're automated, it's cheaper, the numbers look better, margins are better. You kind of take the industry from within, right? The other second option is you get to a certain point, you now have all that tech kind of bundled, right? How do you license that out? How do you franchise that out, right? Imagine a playbook to renovate homes, right? With, exactly the materials, exactly where to get them, or if they're not at a certain place, this is where you can replace them, and how long it's taken the last 100 crews, and how much it actually helps the home price, right? For example, you could franchise that out, right? And you can be the demand engine and the software layer for all these different crews around the country, right? And so I think a lot about Katerra doing the opposite, right? They said, tech, all right, throw it at everybody and we'll just take it from within, right? You almost have to go the opposite way. You have some very little tech, slow efficiencies that and then go more outwards. And that's kind of a thesis or internal model that we've bet on. Will it all work out? To be determined. As part of my life and job, right? But that's where I think I've seen a lot of people fail by rushing into construction. And I think, going back to an earlier question, like how a VC thinks about it, how I think about it, having grown up in the space and done investments, it's a lot different than someone said, wow, construction's big, we should go throw software at it and automate stuff. That no one wants to hear that. No one on the job site wants to get sold on a news, you're not doing this correctly, even though you've been doing it for 30 years, right?
Yeah, I've seen a lot of tech companies market, like their marketing is to say the construction industry is like slightly above a third world farmer when it comes to technology adoption. Yep. What are you guys trying to accomplish by saying that to construction companies? Like that's ridiculous. That's not helpful at all.
No.
And productivity is some of the worst in the industry. That's not marketing. Like, there's the people who are reading that are like, no shit, I know, and I'm dealing with it on a daily basis. What can you do to help me? You can't say productivity's bad, go sign up for our $20,000 a month software package. Like that's not going to work. And I really like what you said about start manually and work up to automation. We see this in the work we do with our customers and developing their internal processes. The tendency is to want to go straight to automation. Like, man, I want to automate my schedules and I want the system to do everything for me. And there are several steps. It starts with a Google Sheet. Well, first of all, it starts with a marker board and some Post-it notes. What is your process that you want to automate? First of all, let's design it. Let's get the team on board with it. Let's work off a whiteboard for a while. Make sure that works. Get some real life feedback. And let's document that process. Then let's work our way into automation. And so a couple of things that I see that happen when people jump to automation is, one, they just never try it. They get overwhelmed and they quit about 30, 40, 50% in. Or they just get really frustrated and they do start using it, but there's no adoption, it doesn't work, so they just scrap the whole thing. And it's because they're trying to skip steps. Yeah.
I think a lot of people, I can just mostly speak from the entrepreneur side, right? They don't understand the inputs and outputs, right? They say, oh, estimation's really hard, we should do a better job, right? Or scheduling is done on a whiteboard, that's stupid, we should go put it into a whatever. There's a reason why, right? Like, there's people can go and look at it and it's right there and it takes 2 seconds, right? Logging into another app or going on, just typing into your laptop, whatever, every morning. The workflow changes, right? And the input and output of where they actually get this, who does the scheduling, how's that done? Where, like, how do you actually know how to estimate something when it's kind of changing at all times and each project unique, right? Like, there's no templatized version a lot of the time. So the people kind of come in and say, they rush, right? They say, let's automate it, but they don't take the time to understand why it's currently done this way, what can be done, like what do we have to do to streamline, to be able to automate it, right? I think you said prepping for it and understanding, I think it's a big issue. And I also think you mentioned it, people, how people talk, right? Hey, inefficient, here's $20,000 package. Construction firms are not built, they're organized like tech companies. Tech companies have enterprise contracts that someone in HR buys, and next thing you know, you all have a C license, right? Everyone in construction does their own thing a lot of the time, right? There's things that are mandated or best practices, but every crew, every manager, every project manager has their own way of doing things. And so a blanket sale, right, is really, really hard in construction. So I think going back to like understanding, how people actually, like, what does the construction industry actually look like? How do people do things? It's not similar to anything else, right? And I think that takes a long time to understand.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, and the different geographies, the regional changes, the differences between residential and commercial, between commercial and industrial, utilities, site work, that sort of thing. And a lot of times that gets overlooked. And then the really hard work is figuring out what are the root causes of the problems. So many people give it a glancing blow. Oh, it's productivity. Okay, what's the easiest thing we can do for productivity? Time tracking. It's sort of like years ago, I heard that FedEx was having trouble with their trucks backing into parked cars. So they did a study, rolled out this initiative, and they said, here's what we're going to do. We need louder backup alarms. So they spent millions of dollars upgrading the backup alarms on all their trucks. And guess what? Those parked cars didn't hear the louder backup alarm any better than the quieter one, because that wasn't the problem. The problem wasn't the parked cars not hearing it. It was that the driver couldn't see it. So they didn't get to the root cause. And I see a lot of people throwing software, I like that term, throwing software at symptoms and then wondering why it doesn't stick. It's because you didn't get to the root cause of the problem. And that's hard, and it's different in every case, and it's not easy, definitely.
And I think that's why we've seen so many software solutions get stuck in one area, right? Everyone wants to be the big project management solution. They want to take down Procore. They want to, you name it, right? They solve a symptom a lot of the time. I'm sure they're helping, but it doesn't help the root cause. So why it doesn't help enough to expand across different teams? Or, hey, now we were doing time tracking. Now we're gonna do payroll. They're like, well, what? That doesn't correlate, right? We already have a payroll, right? Unless it all flows together and really has that big efficiency gain and becomes the de facto solution, it's going to be a point solution that some crews use and some don't, and start projects forever, right? And that's fine, but it's not the ambition of a lot of people in the tech world, right?
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of people coming in from outside, there are a lot of people from technology, a lot of people finance, maybe manufacturing, coming into the construction space. What are some of the things that they tend to get wrong about construction? In other words, what are some of the things that maybe they don't know?
Yeah. I think the main thing people get wrong, and they oversimplify it, right? I think they don't understand, or I think they have this perception that there's been no tech ever tried, right? No tech's ever been used on site. No one's thinking about it. They're just stuck in their own ways and hard-headed. That's so far from the truth, right? Like every crew, even the smallest crew on a random project, has tried technology and want to try technology, right? And want to bring efficiencies. One issue I would even say is there's probably been too many attempts, right? I mean, once kind of PlanGrid did their thing, right, and became ubiquitous, everyone needed to have a new app, right? And like, do we all need 20 apps on site, right? There's text messages are pretty good. WhatsApp groups are good, right? Like there's people come in and I think they underestimate what's been done before, what's been tried, what doesn't work, why it didn't work. Like I call it the graveyard, right? When we see a company, hey, it's just we're going to help out with procurement, for example, and logistic, kind of like the UPS, right? Like a big issue is getting it on site and finding where to deliver and making sure it's on time and tracking, right? Totally agree. I think that's a huge issue. there's been a lot of companies try it and fail, right? So people need to understand why. And a lot of that's just spending time on site, right? And actually getting your hands dirty and being with people, right? That actually do it. I think that I say this is kind of my rule of thumb, or maybe not rule of thumb, but mental model. Everyone knows the issues in construction. You're not, there's no one's creating like, oh, wow, I never thought about that. Everyone knows exactly what's going wrong. It's been battle tested. It's been doing the same thing for years. People have been on site for 30 years, right? They know what's wrong. That's not new, right? How to solve it, where to start, how to get in people's hands. That is what needs to be new, right? I don't think just throwing a software solution at the problem, everyone's done that, right? So people need to understand what's been happened before, why it hasn't worked, and what can actually be done differently versus, I don't know, hey, it's now software versus paper, right?
Yeah. I just recently did a webinar and talked about a specific piece of software. And basically there's this kryptonite that renders just about any software useless. So whether it's Procore, Buildertrend, time tracking software, financial software, whatever it is, there's this kryptonite that renders it useless. And I know a lot of people who've said, well, I've been paying for this software for like 2 years, 3 years, never used it. I tried it, it didn't work. They've tried multiple softwares. They've asked me, hey, can you hook me up with a coder who can help me develop my own custom software to run my business on? And I tell them, like, that's not the problem. Software is not the problem. It's what I call the just enough to start trap. You're doing just enough to start, just enough to get by, just enough to get an estimate out, just enough to get somebody hired, just enough to get a project started. And you're living in crisis mode, constant crisis mode. And if the only thing you respond to is a fire, then it doesn't matter what software you have because you're not going to use it. It's like kryptonite to Superman. It's useless. And you could probably spend $500,000 to develop your own software, but that's not going to work either because that's not the problem. And so it's really important to understand what's the real problem. What's the reason people aren't using the software? And a lot of times it's mindset. It's between the ears. So good advice there for folks coming in from the outside. You're exactly right. People know. I see this a lot. Oh, I'm a tech guy or I'm a finance guy. It's you guys don't realize this, but productivity is not good, or your profit margins should be higher. Again, people doing the work are like, no shit. What can you do to help me? And it's really important to get to the root cause and actually solve those problems. So, all right. You have a new fund that you're announcing that's coming out soon. Talk about that. Who might be interested? Who needs to know about this? And tell us about this fund that's coming out.
Yeah, brand new fund. Myself and two other partners. Pre-seed seed, still doing what we've been doing the last 10 years, a little bit bigger, have a little bit more ability to write some more checks. But at the end of the day, we want to back awesome entrepreneurs with big checks, early stages, right? Continue to love the built world, continue to love construction. I think anyone, both on founder side, but also folks at the customers, right? On the sub level who are interested in innovation would love to chat with in general, right? That helps inform me. It also helps me get the right technology, the right people, and help out and understand, right? Getting the psychology, who actually would be good here. So anyone is open, and please reach out to me. A couple of trends that we've been spending time in, obviously housing. We've done a lot in housing. So in kind of a rule for us, right? We don't do competitive companies. So another 3D printer, we're not going to do, right? So finding new technologies to how we're building housing. Is it financing? Is it different parts of the development phase? Always super interesting. And then labor, we've talked about this a bunch, right? I think labor going forward is one of the biggest issues across the whole workforce, right? Not just construction. Construction is one. How do we institutionalize the knowledge that these folks have had for years that are retiring and get that into our companies or technologies that will allow people to start joining and making it easier, right? I love robotics. Robotics are super cool. they can't do everything. They can only do a certain amount of things, to be honest, right? We need to find ways to better the workforce, right? And it's meeting people where they are, kind of going back to like, don't just say we're automating a workflow and we don't need that person anymore. The person has a real job and has a reason to be there, right? How do we understand, or how does an entrepreneur understand what can be automated? How do we make people more efficient? How do we augment them? There's less people on the job site, right? So how do we actually make them be do the jobs of 2 to 3 people, right? Labor is super interesting to me. I think a lot of people spend time figuring out where to get labor. I think that's getting better, or finding and retaining, that's getting better. Still not there yet. So we're still looking into that space. Yeah, look, I think anyone building in construction or construction related, construction, housing, commercial, all the above, right? Please reach out. It'd be great.
Great stuff. So if folks want to follow you, read some of the articles you've written, connect with you, where are some of the best places that they can go to do that?
Absolutely. So best way to reach me, David at Signia VC.com. That's the email is where I do most of my communication. Try to write a lot more. Have a Substack. It's called The Essential Creators. I can maybe send you the link after to post. Try to write a lot about housing, but a lot about just where we're interested as a fund, right? Where I'm spending time thinking about in the built industrial world. That's where to read, and then LinkedIn as well. I think LinkedIn still our medium, are the best way to really understand what's going on. So yeah, email David at signavc.com, Substack, and LinkedIn.
Excellent. And I'll if you could share those links with me after we finish up, I'll be sure to put those in the show notes. So for those of you listening or watching on YouTube, go down into the show notes or the description below this, wherever you're watching and listening, and you'll find those. And then I'll also include links to your portfolio companies that you shared as well. So great stuff. Well, David, thanks for the work you're doing. Thanks for taking time to be on here. It's been pretty enlightening. So I appreciate you doing this.
Thanks again for having me on.